Task Force is a war film filmed in black and white with some Technicolor sequences about the development of U.S. aircraft carriers from the US Langley to the US Franklin. Although Robert Montgomery was originally considered for the leading role, the film stars Gary Cooper, Jane Wyatt, Walter Brennan, Wayne Morris, Julie London and Jack Holt. Task Force was the only film Gary Cooper and Jane Wyatt made together, and was the last of the 8 films Cooper and Walter Brennan made together. The U.S. Navy provided complete support in not only loaning naval vessels and facilities, but also allowed the use of archival footage of the development of naval air power. Plot: as a 1917 graduate of the Naval Academy, naval aviator Jonathan L. Scott spends 28 years, from 1921 to 1949, promoting U.S. naval aviation and the power of the aircraft carrier. During that period, he antagonizes powerful people in the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Congress, and marries Mary Morgan, the widow of a fellow flyer who died in a crash during a carrier takeoff aboard the US Langley. Throughout, Scott has the help and friendship of his mentor and superior officer, Pete Richard. The Scotts spend 2 years in Hawaii and then move to Annapolis, where Scott, now a lieutenant commander, is to teach naval aviation, but his outspoken stand in favor of aircraft carriers in combat causes him to lose a promotion. After Japan invades Manchuria, Scott is offered a civilian sales position selling aircraft in Europe but remains in the Navy. After Pearl Harbor is attacked by the Japanese, Scott's ship, the US Enterprise, is heavily involved in action at the Battle of Midway. Scott later travels to Washington to plead for more carriers, and eventually a carrier fleet is produced. During the Battle of Okinawa, the fleet, with Scott as the captain of the carrier US Franklin, proves its worth. When his carrier flight deck is badly damaged by Japanese torpedo aircraft, the ship is forced to withdraw to the U.S. for repairs, and the war ends when they arrive at the Navy Yard in New York. 4 years after the end of the war, Scott, as a rear admiral, retires and joins Mary, who is waiting for him on the dock. Cast: as appearing in Task Force, Gary Cooper as Jonathan L. Scott, Jane Wyatt as Mary Morgan, Wayne Morris as McKinney, Walter Brennan as Pete Richard, Julie London as Barbara McKinney, Bruce Bennett as McCluskey, Jack Holt as Admiral Joseph M. Reeves, Stanley Bridges as Senator Bentley, John Ridgely as Dixie Rankin, Richard Rober as Jack Southern, Art Baker as Senator Vincent, Maroney Olson as Admiral Ames, Ray Montgomery as pilot, Harlan Ward as Timmy Kissel, Edmund O'Brien as radio announcer, Louis Brian Fields as radio officer. Lou. Production. In 1948, Warner Brothers obtained archival U.S. Navy footage documenting the rise of naval aviation, as well as Technicolor footage filmed during the war in the Pacific, including the Battle of Midway, the Japanese attack on US Yorktown, and a kamikaze attack on US Franklin. Encouraged by the offer of support from the U.S. Navy, when the production received permission to proceed with the film, a decision was made to shoot the first segments in black and white to merge into the original footage of the US Langley, the first American aircraft carrier, and the US Saratoga. Principal photography began in late 1948 on the escort carrier, US Bairoko, to replicate the US Langley, as well as Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego. The U.S. Navy provided access to naval facilities, with costs amounting to as much as $24,000 a day being incurred when an admiral's barge and jet fighters were commandeered. Additional work took place at the Burbank studios to cover interiors and process shots. Production finally wrapped on January 5, 1949. Near the end of the film changes from black and white to Technicolor in order to unobtrusively use actual combat film shot in color. The change comes just after a scene showing a contentious meeting in Washington, D.C., in which Brennan and Cooper argue with a senator who wants to stop building carriers. After some aerial shots of a task force at sea in an aircraft landing on a carrier, still in black and white, a shot of a sailor in combat gear silhouetted against the sky is in color, but filtered to make it sepia, a technique similar to that used on the transitional shot of Dorothy opening the door of her house to reveal Munchkinland in The Wizard of Oz. This is followed by Cooper at night walking the deck of his first command, still in sepia, and aircraft taking off at night. The next shot, of a naval task force with air cover, is in full color. Complications set in during the filming of task forces consecutively. 4 separate crews were at work with the resultant task of merging all of the live action and archival footage. One of the near disasters involved a delivery truck that caught on fire with its load of cut and stock film along with daily rushes, personal baggage and makeup destroyed. More serious was a series of accidents involving the star, who had already expressed reservation both about the script and his perceived inadequacies as an actor. In December 1948, Cooper was on a Navy barge that broke down in fog, and began to take on water, almost floundering on the rocks in Long Beach Harbor before he was rescued by a Navy ship. Cooper was subsequently hospitalized with a high fever. He was nearly seriously injured on another occasion. During gunnery practice, when Cooper was on the US Antietam, an unmanned target aircraft was hit and caught fire, heading for the crowded deck where all of the actors and crew were standing before skimming overhead, and crashing in the ocean. Historical accuracy during the Battle of Midway scene. The Japanese carrier blowing up is actually HMS Barham exploding after being torpedoed by German submarine U-331. When Cooper and Brennan attend the mid-1920s reception in Washington, D.C., the Chief of Naval Operations is called Admiral Ames. The real CNO was Admiral Edward Walter Eberle. The movie CNO is clean-shaven. Eberle had a full beard. Seen listening to Scott tells N. Bentley about the use of aircraft carriers over battleships in future naval warfare and that Japan is a threat to the United States. The real Japanese naval attaché who would have heard that conversation was Captain Isoroku Yamamoto. Later, Admiral Yamamoto would be the architect of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Aircraft used in the film Pullmans did much of the flying in the early aerial sequences. Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. Boeing Model 100 standing in for a Curtiss F-8C2 held over. Curtiss F-8C2 held over. Curtiss P-36 Hawk standing in for a Mitsubishi A-6M0. Douglas SBD Dauntless. Douglas TBD Devastator. Grumman F-4F Wildcat. Grumman F-6F Hellcat. Grumman F-9F Panther. Grumman TBM Avenger. Kawanishi H-8K, Mitsubishi A-6M0, Nakajima B-6N, Orenco Model F standing in for a Vought VE-7, Vought SB-2U Vindicator, Vought VE-7. In popular culture in the film, White Heat, when Arthur Cody Jarrett played by James Cagney is chased by federal investigators, to lose them, he drives the car into Sanval Drive-In, where Task Force is showing. Later in the movie, when Cody's mother is interrogated by the cops, she says that she was with Werner watching the film and that it was exciting. Reception. Special premieres were screened on the US Midway at Sale in the Atlantic and the US Valley Forge in the Pacific. When released years after the end of World War II, Task Force was inevitably compared to wartime features and documentaries that chronicled the efforts of the U.S. Navy. Audiences on a whole received the film enthusiastically, making it one of the largest grossing pictures of the post-war era. Critics, although acknowledging the cobbled-up look of the black and white photography blending into color, still gave the story positive reviews, keying in on the dramatic aspects.